Hello my debaucherous darlings, and welcome back to the Goth Attacked. So, I have a slight obsession. I absolutely love seating. I love chairs, I love couches. Basically anything that involves putting your butt on something I'm a big fan of. And I love finding things secondhand. I can't help myself. Just every time I see a beautiful chair, especially if it's got a little bit of a vintage vibe, I just have to get it. I have to save it. The problem is sometimes it's not the right aesthetic or it's not the right color, like this one. Now don't get me wrong, I love a grandma dusty rose sort of pink, but it's just not the color or the vibe for the space right now, and my plan is to reupholster this. So several years ago, I reupholstered this beautiful vintage couch that I found on the side of the road that somebody was literally throwing out. It was absolutely insane. And while I'm very happy with the final product and I think it looks beautiful, it was an arduous process. It was like 6 months of work and 80 billion nails and staples to pull out. And when I started the project, I really wasn't anticipating everything as I was unearthing. It ended up having boar horsehair for the stuffing, and it just became a much bigger project. And so for this, I'm trying to do something much simpler. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the existing fabric on this chair and instead wrap the new fabric over it. In this sense, it'll end up being a much quicker and easier project, and I think it allows the existing fabric to sort of act as the protective layer of the chair still. And so I think the first thing we have to do to get this going is to clean this up and get it all nice and ready to be covered. I am going to be covering the existing fabric forever, and so I want it to be clean. That was pretty gross. I'm really glad that I cleaned this up. So now I think I'm going to focus on painting up all of the beautiful wood pieces on this chair. I'm gonna get everything taped off, cleaned up, and then get started on painting everything. I think it's gonna be much easier to do this before I add the fabric, so that's why I'm gonna do this first. So I got the first coat on the chair. I ended up going with a chalk paint. It's just easier, quicker. It doesn't require, sanding, getting things refinished before you just slap it on. But now that I am suitably covered in paint, I'm gonna let this dry. I'll see you lovelies tomorrow. So I was able to get the second coat of paint on the chair. It definitely needed it. I'm really glad I chose the chalk paint. It makes the whole process much simpler, but I am going to have to put a protective wax coating over it. So I'll be doing that a little bit later. But right now, I am going to start getting the fabric that I've chosen ready. I have this beautiful damask patterned blanket that I've had for a really long time, and I've actually been saving specifically to do this chair project. Part of the reason why I really like this idea is I think sometimes when you go and try to find fabric for things like this, it can be really hard to find something in the style that you want. And I think it's hard when it's a piece of furniture because it's something you're gonna wanna have in your space for a very long time. And I think thinking outside of the box and using things like curtains or blankets can be a really good tactic for getting the right style of fabric that you want. I love this fabric. It's got this beautiful damask pattern that has kind of a Cthulhu vibe to it, and I think that's really unique and special. And it is just so insanely soft. It's just so soft. This blanket really delights my gothy soul. It's just so soft and so beautiful. The interesting thing about using a blanket is it is double-sided, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to seam rip the edges of it, and then essentially I'm getting 2 pieces of fabric for the price of 1 piece of fabric. The backing doesn't have the damask pattern on it, but that's okay because I think I'm going to use that for the back of the chair, and I'll use the damask pattern for the front of the chair. So you might be wondering if a blanket is actually durable enough to be a fabric choice for a chair. And I really think that it is. Blankets are something that actually go through a fair amount of use. And when I'm doing a project like this and I'm using an unconventional fabric, the thing that I look for is the care instructions, and I just make sure that the washing instructions are not so complicated that it would create a problem being on a piece of furniture or something like that. So I think this is a really great way to find a fabric that you love and potentially even reuse something that could otherwise go to the dump. So I think this is a really great way to reuse fabric. So I'm ready to get started on the fabric. And what I've done is I've measured this longer distance along the back of the chair, and I've pre-cut the fabric to that length. What this has done is it's given me a long amount of fabric that should be roughly the right size for the inside portion of this chair. And what I'm going to do is lay the fabric out starting at the middle and then slowly glue the fabric along these pre-existing seams. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm following the pattern of the chair as it exists now and making sure that I'm putting my new fabric seams where the old ones exist. I think this is going to be a bit of a chaos moment, but I genuinely enjoy chaos moments in projects. I think it's a bit of a problem-solving opportunity, and so we're just gonna try and see if this works. So I've gone ahead and I started laying out the fabric along the seam lines. I'm using sewing pins to help keep the fabric in place. Now that I have a good sense that I do think this is definitely gonna work, I'm gonna start going in with some liquid sew, and I'm gonna use this to adhese the new fabric to the existing fabric. So let's do this. So this process worked out insanely well. I would highly recommend if you have a chair, you want to try this. It's really, really simple. It's incredibly fast. All I did was I used a fabric measure to measure out the different areas, cut my fabric. I used sewing pins to lay things out and make sure things were in place, and I just used liquid stitch to glue the pieces down and held them in place until it was dry, and I think it looks amazing. This is such a satisfying project because it's something that I've been wanting to do for a really long time, and I was really worried that it wasn't going to work out the way I thought it would in my head. And I think this is a really good lesson, and sometimes you just have to try and throw your hat into the ring and see what happens. I think sometimes we get really caught up in the idea of doing something perfectly, and I think the important thing is just to do something. So now what I'm going to do is I have all these edges that need to be cleaned up a little bit, so I'm gonna use my scissors to clean them up, and then I've got this beautiful braided trim that I'm gonna put in all these areas just to give it a really finished look. And again, same thing, all I'm gonna be doing is using the liquid stitch to glue the trim down. So I think this is gonna be really simple, and I think it's gonna look so, so good. Oh my God, I love this chair so insanely much. I am so glad that I took this on. At the beginning of this, I was a little worried that this wasn't going to work out the way I thought it would, but this was so insanely easy. It was like a weekend project and insanely cheap, and I just love that I got to reuse something that may have ended up in the dump otherwise. And I'm so in love with this chair. I think it's so beautiful. I think this is such a fast and easy project that anybody could take on, so I definitely recommend trying it out. And if this is a project you're thinking of trying out, I would love to know, so comment below if you're thinking of taking this on. Thank you for tuning in with us. If you enjoyed yourself, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. And if you want to get notifications, hit the notification bell and you will know every time we are up to some creative nonsense here at the Gothic. If you want even more content, check out our Patreon. We post an after show called our Mortem, which is a really fun way for you to see what's going on behind the scenes and get more information about the project that doesn't always end up in our videos. It's a great way to support the channel and ensures we can continue to make awesome content for all you debaucherous darlings. This has been wonderful, my darlings. Until next time, be creative, live fully, and memento mori.